Sean Combs found guilty on 2 of 5 counts. Today, July 2nd, 2025, after a nearly 2-month-long trial filled with disturbing testimony and high-profile media coverage, the jury in the United States v. Sean Combs case returned what many are calling a split but significant verdict. Sean Combs, known publicly as Diddy, was acquitted of the 3 most serious federal charges against him. 1 count of racketeering conspiracy under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, and 2 counts of sex trafficking, which allege that he used force, fraud, or coercion to transport women for sexual exploitation. However, the jury found Combs guilty on 2 separate counts of violating the Mann Act, a federal law that criminalizes the transportation of individuals across state lines for the purpose of engaging in prostitution or other illegal sexual activities. These 2 convictions involved Cassie Ventura, Combs' longtime romantic partner, who testified that she was coerced and manipulated into crossing state lines to attend, quote, freak-off sex parties allegedly organized by Combs. She described being given drugs, being filmed without consent, and having her movements and finances controlled by the music mogul. An anonymous accuser, referred to only as Jane, who gave harrowing testimony about being physically assaulted, sexually abused, and ultimately trafficked across state borders for the purpose of satisfying Combs' instructions and demands at similar parties. Legal consequences of the verdict. While Combs was not convicted of sex trafficking, the 2 guilty verdicts under the Mann Act still carry serious federal consequences. Each count of transportation to engage in prostitution is punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison, resulting in a potential maximum sentence of 20 years. There are also additional penalties that may be considered at sentencing, including financial restitution, supervised release, and mandatory registration depending on the court's interpretation of the nature of the crimes. The sentencing hearing has not yet been scheduled, but federal prosecutors have already indicated they will pursue the maximum allowable sentence, citing the long-running pattern of abuse, use of wealth and power to control victims, and the emotional toll on the survivors. Combs, who has no prior criminal convictions, may argue for leniency under the federal sentencing guidelines. His legal team is expected to emphasize the lack of a unanimous guilty verdict on the trafficking and racketeering counts, his philanthropic work, and his, quote, long-standing role as an entrepreneur and artist. Legal experts suggest that the jury's decision to acquit Combs on the sex trafficking and racketeering charges likely reflects the higher burden of proof required for those counts. Trafficking cases must show explicit use of force, fraud, or coercion, not just immoral or abusive behavior. Meanwhile, a racketeering conviction would have required the jury to see Combs as orchestrating a formalized criminal enterprise, which can be harder to prove when dealing with informal celebrity entourages and lifestyle excess. However, the Mann Act convictions still signal that the jury believed Combs knowingly transported individuals for illicit sexual purposes, even if coercion or enterprise-level planning wasn't fully established. Public and media reaction. The verdict has triggered divided reactions. Supporters of Combs argue the partial acquittals validate his defense that the relationships were consensual, if messy. Others believe the guilty counts represent a long overdue reckoning for a man who allegedly used his fame and wealth to exploit vulnerable women behind closed doors. With sentencing ahead and possible appeals in motion, one thing is certain. The verdict, while not a full conviction, is far from an exoneration. The court has found Sean Combs criminally responsible for transporting women across state lines for prostitution, marking a historic moment in both celebrity justice and federal prosecution of sexual misconduct. Let's consider an overview of the trial. Sean Combs was indicted in September 2024 in the Southern District of New York on multiple federal charges, including racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation for prostitution under the Mann Act. The indictment came after a wide-ranging investigation involving multiple accusers, staff testimony, and financial records. In March 2024, federal agents raided Combs' homes in Los Angeles and Miami, seizing illegal firearms, various drugs, electronic devices, and over 1,000 bottles of baby oil, which prosecutors argued were used during orchestrated sex events. Authorities claimed these so-called freak-off parties were planned and controlled by Combs, involving coerced participation, manipulation, and intimidation. Key testimony came from his former partner Cassie Ventura, an anonymous woman referred to as Jane, male escorts, former employees, and rapper Kid Cudi, who alleged Combs once threatened to blow up his car. The defense argued that while the relationships may have been toxic or unconventional, they were consensual. No witnesses were called by the defense, and Combs did not take the stand. Potential sentence. Each of the 2 counts for transportation to engage in prostitution carries a statutory maximum of 10 years in federal prison, exposing Combs to a possible total sentence of up to 20 years. The sentencing judge will weigh factors such as aggravating circumstances, whether the offenses involved minors, which they did not, and Combs's lack of a prior criminal record. Sentencing guidelines will also consider the length of time the alleged conduct occurred and its impact on the victims. The defense is expected to request a concurrent sentence and argue for reduced time based on character letters and Combs's public service. Prosecutors, however, are pushing for a substantial prison term, citing abuse of power, lack of remorse, and emotional damage to victims. A formal sentencing date has yet to be announced, and Combs remains in custody while awaiting a bail determination.